Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
So today is the Disappearance Day of Prabhupada. Prabhupada as we know, used to always say that association with the Guru and separation is a higher form of service, especially because the practical necessity of this age, and also on spiritual grounds, not only on pragmatic grounds. Prabhupada, of course, used the two terms Vani and Vapu. Vani means message, as in Goloka Vani Pracharani. And Vapu means body. Yesterday I was telling a story how Prabhupada asked me to, I was in Berkeley as a brahmachari around April of 1970. And Prabhupada heard that I was teaching the devotees to chant the Upanishad mantras, and he was very pleased, so he sent for me. And I came down, and Prabhupada said, "Stay with me, and I will personally teach you Sanskrit." So I was so ecstatic to hear this. And the next day or two, Prabhupada was leaving to fly to Japan, to Tokyo. And I drove Ramananda, who was there with Prabhupada, drove him downtown LA to buy the ticket. And so I asked him, should I buy a ticket? Because Prabhupada said, "Stay with me and I'll personally teach you Sanskrit." But Prabhupada never mentioned it again, and the next thing I knew, Ramananda had gotten Prabhupada to authorize me going to Boston to work on his books. But actually that's what happened. I stayed with Prabhupada in the higher sense of continuing to try to serve him, and then he taught me Sanskrit. So, on the one hand, we do not minimize the personal association of the spiritual master. It's not insignificant, but at the same time, as Prabhupada once wrote in a letter, when I was a brahmachari again in Berkeley, the letter actually arrived to one of the devotees in the temple, so of course it was read to everyone. And Prabhupada said, "You are not seeing the real form of the Guru." He said, just like the clouds sail across the moon. The clouds are carried by the wind and they move across the moon. But it appears that the moon is moving through the clouds. That's the example Prabhupada gave. So another time, one time I was Prabhupada's secretary, I wrote Prabhupada a letter at the end of 1975 asking him if I'd heard that Prabhupada was inviting the different leaders to come and serve as a secretary for a limited time, a month or so. So I wrote Prabhupada and asked if I could come, and he said yes. He said, "I can have so many secretaries." So Prabhupada was in Mayapur at the time. And I flew there. I was with Prabhupada the month before the Gaur Purnima festival. In fact, that's when they were building, if you know Mayapur, what they call the long building. They were just building that sort of madly, trying to get it done in time for the festival. And probably the first thing, he'd come on the balcony and he'd direct the construction. But So I spent a month with him. Prabhupada didn't really give me any secretarial duties. He would just have me sit in his room and he was talking about different things. And also when a lot of people come to see Prabhupada, especially in Bengal, because he was the local boy that makes good. And so in so many important people and village people, just so many people would come to see Prabhupada. Sort of had an open door policy. And Prabhupada had on his desk a big jar of sweets. And Prabhupada was really determined that everyone that came would get some prasadam. So many times the room would be filled with guests, and some guests would leave before Prabhupada noticed it. So many times he would send me running down the corridors in the Mayapur building to give that person some prasadam. So many times chasing down guests. And so after being Prabhupada's secretary, well, so-called, just sort of being with Prabhupada for a month, the Mayapur festival came. So I've been with Prabhupada for a month and a half. Never really spent that much time continuously with him. And then I came to see him one day, and first thing he said to me was, "This personal association is not so important. We have to preach." In other words, he had me get back to work. So pragmatically, if we look at serving Prabhupada in separation, because in a sense, his disappearance day is the day that everyone in ISKCON, all of his followers, the day they began to serve him in separation from his physical presence. And from a practical point of view, Prabhupada being the great Acharya and doing what no one else had ever done, at least not in our recorded history, bringing Krishna consciousness all over the world. Prabhupada sacrificed his own health, knowingly sacrificed his own health to keep his movement going, to save us. And so even, let's say, the little bit of association most of his disciples had, because there was, obviously had his servants or secretaries or leaders, but most of the devotees in ISKCON, even when Prabhupada was here, probably most of his disciples when he was here hardly ever even exchanged a word with him. Or they saw him one day. And so it was just a practical necessity. He was and is the Acharya for the world. And so most of the devotees, the great majority of devotees, almost all the time, were serving him in separation, even when he was physically present. And that's why he'd always tell us that you have to understand that this is the higher service, because it was just the reality of Prabhupada being the leader of a worldwide movement. And from a spiritual point of view, I noticed, it's hard not to notice. Well, even when Prabhupada was here, it was sort of notorious in ISKCON. You need some water or something? Throat lozenge? Here.
I'll get one.
There's one right here.
Okay.
Complete. First down. So, it was notorious, even when Prabhupada was here, that his personal servants tended to have spiritual difficulties. Not because Prabhupada put them in difficulties, but just because of the tendency of taking Prabhupada to be the external form. In fact, when Prabhupada actually disappeared in 1977, I noticed that practically all the devotees whose, how should I put it, their main attachment in Krishna consciousness was just to Prabhupada's personal company and all the anecdotes. He moved his hand like this, he glanced at me like that, he said this. Hardly any of them really did that well. Although, of course, they're sincere. So, to understand Prabhupada, because as a pure devotee, as a liberated soul, even his external activities, of course, were fascinating and attractive and powerful. But ultimately, seeing Prabhupada as what he really is, a pure spiritual being, not limited by time and space, by material time and space. Devotees who really understood that, who really connected with that, connected with Prabhupada at that level, that connection is never weakened by physical separation. I remember when I was 1972-73, I took sannyas, ripe old age of 23. Oh my God. And I was traveling around lecturing in universities around America, and I remember that, of course, in those days they had these little cassette players. And the cassette, we consider it to be like really amazing technology. You could actually, you should be able to reel, but I had a little cassette player, and I had my little tape collection. Everyone had their tape collection back then, Prabhupada tapes. There were no other tapes, there were no other. And I remember we would really work hard. I'd be with usually about 2 brahmacharis, and we'd put on 2 feast programs a day at different universities, and sell lots of books, and put books in libraries, and just everything, cook and clean. So we were doing so many things, and so I remember at night, we'd get really tired. There's a verse in the Bhagavatam, I remember probably giving class on this verse. There's a verse in the 2nd canto that says, the residents of Vrindavan, when Krishna was there, worked so hard that they would sleep very well at night. It's like you really work hard during the day, but you don't have insomnia. And I remember every night we'd sleep in the van, of course. That was luxury. I mean, my first took sannyasa, I slept in a little Volkswagen Beetle, little Volkswagen. So when I got a van, I thought, boy, this is real luxury. Sleep in a van. So. But every night, as I lay down to go to sleep, and I fall asleep immediately. The last thing I would hear is I would put on Prabhupada's tape and hear his voice, and his presence was so powerful. I still remember those moments of hearing him sing different songs. And there's a section which I was not less with him than when I was actually physically in his presence. In some ways, it was even more powerful. And every night, I was, just lay down in the van. That's the last thing I would hear before I fell asleep. Prabhupada's voice and his presence was so strong. So here we are now. Another point I made in a lecture I gave on the same day, Prabhupada's Disappearance Day, the same occasion, in Los Angeles, that I guess it bears repeating, that it would be absurd to think that devotees of later generations, that say disciples of Prabhupada, disciples or their disciples, to think they have less of a connection with Prabhupada. Prabhupada, his self-understanding, how he saw himself, or in terms of what he saw as his central service to his guru, was as the founder Acharya of ISKCON. As the founder Acharya is the person who establishes the way to serve Krishna in a particular age. And Prabhupada, when he would introduce himself, when he would write letters to important people, national leaders, or whatever he would say, he would introduce himself as the founder Acharya of ISKCON. On his books, if you read the Lilamrita, Prabhupada Lilamrita, there was a huge scandal in ISKCON because some of Prabhupada's disciples who were influenced by some conniving members of the Gaudiya Math they published a book in which they just put A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami. They took off the Prabhupada and they took off the founder Acharya because it was basically a takeover attempt. You can read about Lilamrita, the son of Prabhupada's dear godbrothers. The idea being that Bhaktisiddhanta was the real founder Acharya, and Prabhupada was just one of the Gaudiya Math gurus, and therefore all the properties of ISKCON actually belong to these conniving people in India. So Prabhupada, of course, discovered the plot, and everything was cleared up and chastised those disciples. So, but the point is, Prabhupada never asked us to put on his books A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami, Prabhupada, Guru. He wanted founder Acharya. So that's how Prabhupada saw himself, because as Rupa Goswami explains in chapter 6 of the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, Nectar Devotion, many, many gurus can serve at the feet of the Acharya. In fact, the duty of a bona fide guru is just to guide people to serve a great Acharya. So, Prabhupada creating this international movement and serving as founding the movement and serving as its Acharya it's a service, and that role Prabhupada will guide and teach thousands and millions of gurus. So therefore, Prabhupada's role as founder Acharya, in that role, he's equally available to everyone. It would be, as I always said, it would be absurd to say that every succeeding generation is farther away from Prabhupada, because it would lead to an absurd conclusion that as time passes, Prabhupada's own movement is more and more distant from him. But actually the opposite is true. My own opinion, my own experience is that, for example, if you drive across the Rocky Mountains, given this example many times on the interstate, it was much less impressive than I'd expected, for the simple reason that the road, the interstate, is so high up that it looks like you're driving through hills. Big hills, little hills. But if you get to the other side and you go 20 miles away, 30 miles away, then your jaw drops. Because then you actually see how big they are. And so in the same way, in some ways, my disciples, or that generation, or their disciples, in some ways can see Prabhupada more clearly. Precisely because they have better perspective. They can actually see how big he is. And so, I don't mean to say that Prabhupada's disciples are the last one in the world that can understand him. And of course, Prabhupada's many disciples who do understand and love him very much. I'm simply saying, though, that it's not necessarily a disadvantage. There are certain advantages in being a later generation. And also, as Prabhupada said, the Guru is more pleased when you serve the servant as his servant. So, as Lord Chaitanya said, Lord Chaitanya even wanted to get a few steps away. He said, Gopi Bhartu Pada Kamala Yor Dasa Dasa Das. I'm the servant of the servant of the servant. So, in the material world, the lower you go in the pecking order, the less you've got to peck, the less bird feed you get. So that's the material world. The lower you are, the lower you are. But in the spiritual world, it's exactly the opposite. The lower you are, the higher you are. So the more one is serving the servant of the servant of the servant, the more ecstatic and the more exalted the service becomes. In fact, it said that Radharani is always trying to bring other souls to Krishna. So even Radharani, the top, no one can love Krishna as much as Radharani. And yet, she's trying to serve other devotees by bringing them to Krishna. In fact, one time, I remember the devotee wrote a letter to Prabhupada. There was a controversy in LA because, what is community life for? Not to get into endless arguments about things. But so one devotee was preaching that when we go out on Sankirtan and preach in Srila Prabhupada's book, that we're actually following in the footsteps of Radharani because we're bringing other souls to Krishna. And of course, another devotee said that, no, you're just, that's too pretentious or whatever. So they wrote to Prabhupada. That's what it was like in those days. Okay, write to Prabhupada. And Prabhupada wrote back and said, yes. He said, that is a fair analogy. That we go on Sankirtan, right? Following the footsteps of Radharani. By bringing other souls to Krishna. So here we are now. Prabhupada was this perfect, amazing combination of the deepest meditative yogi. Prabhupada he was obviously, in the deepest samadhi all the time. And yet at the same time, he was the consummate pragmatist. And that's something very important, that in Prabhupada's own internal life, he was have this unfathomable realization of Krishna. There was no one could find the limits of his realization of Krishna or his love for Krishna. And yet at the same time, he was extremely pragmatic, and those two things are connected. Because if you really love Krishna, you get the job done. I remember when Prabhupada flew into Gainesville, and he actually didn't fly into Gainesville. When Prabhupada came to Gainesville in 1971, there were no commercial flights to Gainesville then. And so he flew to Jacksonville. It's coming from New York. Flew through Atlanta to Jacksonville. We picked him up in Jacksonville Airport. So I was temple president, yes, and so I went to the gate. In those days, there was no security at airports. Good old days, remember? You just walk to the gate. And I was, of course, completely awestruck that I was 22 years old then. Prabhupada flew in. And as he came through the tunnel into the terminal, and of course, I offered obeisances, and I would never have thought in those days that I'd keep Prabhupada waiting. So when I stood up and offered obeisance, he just said immediately, "Which way?" I'm like, "Let's go, which way?" So that was Prabhupada. He, this perfect combination of spiritual purity, constant samadhi, and yet consummate pragmatism. Get the job done. Just get the job done. I remember when I used to go see Prabhupada, he sent me down to Latin America, and by his mercy, things went extremely well. And I remember sometimes I'd come into his room, and he would just, I just somehow have this impression that he'd always start talking to me before I was set up. Like, he just didn't want to waste time. I'd offer obeisances, and I just have all these memories of I was still on the way back up when he would start telling anybody he wanted to tell me. And so once I was GVC, he would always say, like, so, what is the news? How many temples were opened? How many books distributed? It's not that Prabhupada reduced everything down to numbers, but he kept count. Because, imagine, let's say, God forbid, someone has 10 children and 5 of them are lost. Or just parents, out with their kids, like, "Oh my God, where's Billy? Where's Johnny?" It's like, there's only 3 of you here. Where are the other 2? So it's not like, "Come on, Mom." It's not just about numbers. And that would be absurd. When you love your children, it's like you do keep count. For a very good reason, because if you don't keep count, then you're some kind of monster. So in the same way, that spirit, as someone in pure ecstatic love of Krishna and unlimited compassion for all souls, Prabhupada kept count. And so sort of this cavalier attitude, like, I don't care about the numbers, it's just about how you feel, it's your feelings. Imagine, say, again, God forbid, let's say you had children, some of your children were lost, and someone came back and said, "Come on, Dad, it's not about the numbers, it's just about, I went out there to look for them, and I had the right feelings, so just appreciate that, and appreciate my feelings." So this attempt at Krishna, this sentimentalizing of Krishna consciousness, again, it's not that we want to rack up numbers, like, "Hey, check out my batting average. I sold so many books." We all know in the early days of the movement, people were just kind of like proud of their stats, their statistics. And I sold so many books, I made so many devotees, I opened so many temples. So apart from that immature pride that we all sort of dabbled in, then there's real Prabhupada consciousness, where you keep score, not for your own pride, but you keep score because those are Krishna's children out there. Those are souls out there. Prabhupada really wants to bring them back to Krishna. So that's what we need. We need to, and not only keep score like how many books did I do yesterday, or how many Lakshmi points, or whatever. But it's how is the movement doing? And I remember when I became GBC, I was told by several GBC that Prabhupada had said that as a GBC, first think of the world, then think of your zone. And so, at least some of us, we have to think of the world. what is the state of Prabhupada's mission and what is required to really, because Prabhupada's desires are Krishna's desires, and Krishna's desires are what's best for us. It's not that Krishna just has some whimsical, it's not like some cute little pastime like, Govinda said he wants some pistachio nut ice cream. Okay, who will be the first gopi to get, find the ice cream? It's not, not that these pastimes are, they're wonderful, loving pastimes, but Sankirtan is something really heavy going on. It's about saving souls. It's about saving souls, and so we have to really get very serious about this. Prabhupada was very serious. He was jovial. He would joke. He was actually the most fun person to be around. He was like apart from being a pure devotee, as we would say, he's just a really great guy. Apart from being, eternally liberated pure devotee, he's a really good guy. He was just, and Prabhupada actually said that himself. He said that when he was young, he was sort of like the leader of the pack. He had all his boyfriends, and he was sort of the natural leader. And Prabhupada was just really fun to be around. He really cared about other people. He was really attentive. He was hospitable. And you went to see him. I remember, for example, going to see Prabhupada, and Prabhupada telling me sit on a cushion. He wanted me to be comfortable, so he had ordered me not just to sit on the floor, but to sit on a cushion. Or the time that Prabhupada, back in those days, like in 1970, we used to do Sankirtan all day. That was our movement. And so I was one of the Sankirtan leaders, and if you played the drum hours a day, we used to tape our fingers here. Your skin didn't crack and all that cut. So one time Prabhupada was walking by and he saw me, and he said, "What's wrong?" And I said, "What?" He said, "What's wrong?" He pointed my fingers. I taped my fingers. So it really impressed me that Prabhupada here he was, leading this whole worldwide movement. Yet for Prabhupada, everything stopped when he saw that I had some tape on my finger. He wanted to know what the problem was. I once saw Prabhupada chastise a mother because she let her child run out in the street. Prabhupada was really upset about it. In other words, he was a real person. Prabhupada was a real person. He was the best of real people, actually. But I remember that, and she was saying something like, "Oh, Prabhupada," and he was really upset. He was really upset that she let her child run out like that. The way a real person would be upset. So, what time is the class end? 7:15. Any questions? Oh, what? Yeah. Okay. Oh. So, any questions on Prabhupada or his disappearance date? Yes.
Somebody was saying that you shouldn't say Prabhupada's Shakti because it's speculation.
Okay, someone said we shouldn't call Prabhupada Shakti Avesh Avatar because it's speculation. Funny, Wall Street speculation, I guess. Well, if the term fits. Well, Shakti means power. Avesha means investing. Avesha, literally means like, even the vest, invest is from Sanskrit. Invest, aveshta. And so it means investing power, someone in whom power has been invested. Ava means downward, Tara means crossing. So it's the same Tara as in Paschatya Desha Tarine. Savior of the Western countries literally means one who takes the Western world across from the material side to the spiritual side. So Avatara literally means crossing down crossing. Avatara in the sense of descending. So did Prabhupada descend? Yeah, I think so. Did Prabhupada invest with special power? It looks like it. So, literally he is a Shakti Avatar, so I wouldn't worry about that. All the words seem to fit. I don't see any of the words that don't fit Prabhupada, so, yes?
So, where were you when Srila Prabhupada left, and what was your experience?
I was in Sao Paulo, Brazil. It was a sort of a gloomy, rainy And so it's kind of like the weather sort of fit the event. And I've gone to India 3 times. I've gone to India once for Mayapur meeting, then I've gone I think 3 other times. So I've just all year just traveling back and forth Latin America to see Prabhupada. And it was clear that he was preparing to leave. And in those days we didn't have telephone, because South America we didn't have telephones in temples. That was a luxury. And plus the telephone service was horrible. You couldn't get one. So we used to go to the house of Vishwabandhu's father. That was one of our Prabhupada's when we go to his father. So someone came and told me that there's an urgent phone call. You have to go to his house. And so I knew what it was. As soon as I heard there was an urgent phone call, because we didn't get urgent phone calls in Brazil. So I knew what it was. So I went there, and that's what I thought. And so I came back to the Sao Paulo temple and just gathered the devotees and told them briefly what the situation was, and then just left for the airport to fly to India for the services. And I still remember the plane trip. I don't remember because I'm sure I blocked it out because I don't like long plane trips. But I remember very well the drive through the rain to Congonhas. It was the sort of city airport in Sao Paulo. I remember very much that being driven to the airport for my flight. And what I kept remembering the verses in the first canto of the Bhagavatam, where Parikshit is lamenting for the earth because she lost Krishna, and how it's the earth for whom we have to lament. And so all the way to the airport, I was just sort of lamenting for the earth, lamenting for the world. In terms of myself, I was so absorbed in serving Prabhupada in separation, and I was so absorbed in Prabhupada being present with me that I thought nothing's really changed in my life. I didn't have any feeling that my life had changed, because I thought Prabhupada's still going to be with me, and I'm just going to do exactly the same thing I'm doing now. So I was thinking, I was just lamenting for the world, that the world has lost its great soul. It's like very much like when the world lost Krishna, when he went back to his abode. So those are my thoughts. Yes?
I have a question. In reading Srila Prabhupada's books and hearing his conversations and reading through his lectures and stuff, how do we reconcile apparent differences? I heard sometimes an acharya or guru will give instruction based on adhikar. It's called adhipatika vichara. It's based on the adhikar of the person. They'll reveal or tell them something. Like in Bhagavatam, I was reading the other day, he says in the 3rd canto, it's not possible to go back home, back to Godhead in one life. One should at least try to start from this life. But of course, Prabhupada's
Other times he said, all my disciples going back to Godhead. Prabhupada would often say many things on the same topic. You never change the Siddhanta. And even that's not Siddhanta, it's a detail. So I think that unless we understand this crucial distinction, we're not going to really understand Prabhupada's teachings. So on fundamental issues, which Krishna, there's a word in Sanskrit, tattva, which is sometimes translated as truth. What the word actually means is like a categorical truth. Therefore we say jiva tattva, which is the real category called jiva, or Vishnu tattva. I mean, I don't have time to go into the whole etymology. Tat means that. And therefore, because it's a demonstrative pronoun, so you point out that. So therefore, it can only refer to a real thing. And so that comes to mean like a real thing, as in Om Tat Sat. And tattva means thatness. In other words, having this quality of being a real thing that can be pointed out. And therefore, tattva, having that quality means a fundamental real thing, a real category. So Jiva Tattva, Vishnu Tattva, Prakriti Tattva. So Krishna, in the Gita, Krishna says many times in the Bhagavatam, you have to be tattva-vid. Like Krishna says that tattva-vidhi pranipatena upadekshanti te jnanam jnaninas tattva-darshina. That you have to approach those who have seen tattva, which we translate as seers of the truth, but there are different words for truth in Sanskrit. Satya means truth, as in, it's not false, true, not false, like something which is true. But But tattva means a categorical truth. So specifically, those who have seen tattva, and Krishna uses this tattva, many other times, tattva vid, tattva darshi, vedanti tat, tattva vidas, those who know tattva. So Prabhupada never gives two opinions on tattva, but as far as other details, it depends on time and place, so you have to look at the whole range of what he said. So I think it's that magic moment. Jai Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Let's see. Yeah, I'll show you. First stop it. First stop broadcast. Then stop the